Hello and welcome to GMI, the Guitar and Music Institute. This is episode 4 of 4 of the Hummie Mann interviews. In this final episode, Hummie will discuss working with Jerry Goldsmith, one of his great heroes. He'll discuss going back to education, and he'll also talk about his lauded PNW, the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, which is now recognised as one of the finest film scoring programs in the world, how it started, how it's developed, and where it is now going. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes, please subscribe, but do consider coming over to www.guitarmusicinstitute.com, seeing the individual podcast episodes for further materials, videos and information. So, up and coming is the final episode of the Hummie Mann interview. I hope you enjoy it. We're at a point in history, music and film, where there's almost an expectation from the audience's point of view of what they expect to hear with regards certain scenes and emotions on screen.
Wow, that's a really interesting question. The thing that I always say is that film composers are not really recreating the wheel. They're just putting a different hubcap on it. And I think that the number of designs of hubcaps is pretty much endless. What we've seen in the last, well, I don't know if this is true about the last couple of years, but certainly because of electronics, we've seen new colors be added to the orchestra. You know, if you go back into the 50s, and basically we were all using acoustic instruments, and then electric guitar got added, and then we started bringing in the jazz influence because of Henry Mancini, and then 20th century techniques were certainly something that maybe you could credit Bernard Herrmann for. And we got into electronics, and very possibly Hans Zimmer was one of the main guys that did that. Now there are people that write with a lot more sound design elements, more whooshes and whoosh, filtering of sounds, of white noise. And so the palette has grown. And so I think that because of that, we're always finding new things. I also believe there are people that say that all the melodies have already been written. I don't believe that that's true. I like to, I work hard and I take great pride in the fact that people think I write great melodies. I don't think that I'm ripping off anybody when I'm writing my melodies. I try not to, certainly. I know that whenever I write a theme, I always call up a couple of people that I know who I trust, and I say, okay, let me play this theme, see if I bumped into anything. On occasion, somebody has said, oh, yeah, that sounds a little bit like blah, 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 blah. And I'll go, okay, let me go listen to that and see if I agree or if I should change it. So I think that there's still a lot of ways of expressing various emotions, but they're not going to be brand new, but they're going to be interesting variations. And that's why I say this hubcap thing. I think that we're not going to be recreating the wheel. It's just not going to happen. It has a certain, functionality, film music. I think that one of the things that we have gotten away from contemporary scoring is what I call emotional depth level. You could get away with like a lot more saccharine type of scoring in period films, and in older films you can see this. Whereas in contemporary films, a lot of times the score tells you you should be feeling something, but doesn't tell you what you should be feeling. Thomas Newman's probably one of the great composers at doing that, where you don't get a sense of you get somewhat of a sense of the emotion, but it's more like when his score starts, it's giving you a license to feel something, but it's not telling you what to feel.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. You are listening to GMI, the Guitar and Music Institute. My name is Jed Brocky, and I'm in conversation with the composer Hummie Mann. Now, Hummie, you won a couple of Emmys, haven't you? You've been put up for a whole lot of stuff and actually won 2. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. My first Emmy Award was for being on the team that did the music for the Academy Awards one year. And I actually arranged Billy Crystal's opening number for the Academy Awards. And so it was the whole team. Bill Conti was the conductor and music director. And there was a team of about 4 or 5 arranger orchestrators that worked on the show. Marc, I think, also won for best writing that year of a special song because he wrote he kind of came up with the parody for that I did the arrangement of. So I was at that time working with Marc, and that's why I did the orchestration arrangement. And then the other thing that I won an Emmy for was for outstanding composition for a dramatic series, where I did an episode of a series on Showtime's Picture Windows, and this was an episode called Language of the Heart, where I got to write a kind of a pseudo violin concerto.
Now, I just want to talk about that because when I was 14 years old, I watched this movie, and I couldn't remember the name of it, but I was 13 or 14, and I was watching this film. I think it was during I was off school, it would be the winter holidays, and I was totally taken in by this melody, this boy who was playing the violin. There was this girl that he fancied, and he would go to her. Basically, he would go to where she stayed and look up to the window, and he played, and I thought it was the most wonderful melody. And years later, 30 years later, I found out you were the writer of it.
Making me feel very old here, Jed.
Well, and me too.
Well, thank you very much. I remember getting the script, and the script was very thin for a short film. It was an anthology series called Picture Windows, where every episode was about a piece of art and how that piece of art came to be. And this is Degas' The Rehearsal. And I remember reading the script, and the only thing that they said in the script was he plays a haunting melody. And really the success of that story was if I could pull that off. And what was interesting is that it went very well, obviously, and I've gotten a lot of kudos for writing that piece of music, and gotten fan mail, and I'm glad that I touched so many nerves. I'll never forget when we were mixing the film and we were finally done with it. And at the end of the film, Jonathan Kaplan put up a dedication to his father, Saul Kaplan. He dedicated the film to his father, Saul Kaplan. And I was like sitting there and I was in tears. And because his father, Saul Kaplan, was a film composer.
Wow.
Jonathan turned to me and he said he would have been proud. And I was like, loss of words.
A wonderful story. Wonderful to get an insight into that, Hummie. Now, I could go on and all the different things that you've done, Cyberworld 3D, Thomas the Magic, Railroad, After the Rain, all the conducting, the production, and all the rest of it. But to be honest, we just don't have enough time. I'll obviously be putting a lot of this material on the Guitar and Music Institute website, and it will also include a link to your website so people can check out just the huge amount of work you've done. But I would like to now move on to something that's totally connected, but in a way completely different, because you started up one of the premier schools in teaching people how to score for film and television. And why did you do that?
I think that there's a couple of reasons. I've always been enjoyed passing on knowledge. I started very young. We talked about how I started playing when I was extremely young. When I was 13, I was giving guitar lessons. As a 13-year-old boy, I had like 10 or 15 students, and I was getting paid $5 an hour. When I lived in Los Angeles, I taught at at UCLA Extension's film scoring program. I was teaching writing, how to write for the rhythm section and contemporary harmony practices. 20 some odd years ago, my wife and I moved our family up to Seattle for lifestyle choices. One of the things that I discovered when I first got here is that I was spending a lot of time alone in my room writing music, or down in LA having any interaction with human beings.
Yeah, people probably don't know that, do they, Hummie? It's a very lonely job, isn't it?
Yeah, you spend a lot of time alone, and I'm kind of okay with that, but it just seemed weird that I had no contact with anybody, any human beings, while I was in Seattle. My daughters, who were obviously going to school, one of them had a friend whose parent suggested, well, why don't I start teaching a class in film scoring? Because this woman was actually interested in this. So I contacted Bellevue Community College and was approved to teach an extension course in film composition. Over the years, what happened is that Bellevue Community College needed room space, and they moved me off campus, and snowball just kept on going, and it became its standalone program, which I named the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program. That ran for 15 or 16 years as a series of evening courses. I started out with just me being the teacher, and then added a course in finale, and added a course in digital performer, and added a course in film history. And what ended up happening is that one of the big features of the program was that if you took all the classes, at the end, we would score student-made films with student orchestras. So we would get these films that students were making, and we would score them with a 50-piece orchestra, which was unheard of. And the orchestra was basically made up of high-level student players, some community musicians, people who, had been musicians their whole life, played in community orchestras, but were looking for a different kind of experience, college students as well. And we got a lot of support, especially from, the principal violin instructor at the University of Washington. He brought a lot of his string players, and he would be the concert master. And we scored over 100 student-made films with a 50-piece orchestra that way. So everybody that took the program would get to write a couple of minutes of music for a student-made film.
What an experience.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'd kind of gotten as far as I thought I could get with education, which I really enjoyed. I mean, my two loves are really writing music and teaching people how to do it. I kind of also felt that, getting a little bit on a little soapbox here, that the advent of electronics and sequencers were kind of taking away from the craft of composition. If you were taking a course in creative writing and all they did was teach you how to use a word processing program, you probably feel that you got gypped. But that became kind of pretty much the norm. I'm going to teach film scoring. Well, we're going to teach you how to run Digital Performer or Logic. Well, that's not teaching film composition. That's teaching you to use the tool that one could use. And they kind of became synonymous. And I really felt that there was a lot more that needed to be taught and needed to be passed on. So I was teaching, and then about 9 years ago, I decided that I had kind of taken my program as far as it could go. I mean, I was teaching a number of courses there. It ended up being 4 core courses, film scoring 1, 2, 3, and 4, where in film scoring 1, we taught the basics. In film scoring 2, there was orchestration. Film scoring 3 was a class where you actually did a lot of writing. And film scoring 4 was where you actually scored a student film. And that would take people over a 2-year process. I kind of felt that I had gone as far as I could with the orchestration, with teaching in my own program. And so I joined the faculty of Columbia College Chicago. And I went and I lived in Chicago for 1 year, commuting every other weekend to visit my wife in my house. And
that sounds a pretty heavy schedule.
It was pretty nuts. And what I discovered, as great as Columbia College is, I was too far away from Los Angeles to really continue having any sort of professional career. And there were things that I felt were necessary to be involved in training that if you're running your own program, you can just say, okay, I'm going to start teaching this. Whereas in a big institution, you have to go through committee and have to do, and I kind of felt like things were moving too slowly in a big institution because it would just take so long to make any changes happen. So I came back to Seattle. I had left the course in the hands of my assistant, Tim Hewling. Tim had been teaching the classes, and I was just getting involved in the actual recording sessions and reviewing the work for the recording sessions. Moved back to Seattle. And what happened was that the state, who Tim and I had met with a number of times to see what we could do to get to the next level, knew about the program. And we then joined forces with the Seattle Film Institute, which had just become certified to give out master's degrees. And so we joined them and became the music department. And in becoming the music department, about 2 months into the first year, when we opened our doors, we were just going to be giving out a certificate in film composition. We started in September. By November, the state had already granted us the license to give out a master's degree. And so we were the first 1-year master's degree program in film composition in the United States. Since that time, I went on and did a doctorate degree. I now have a doctorate of musical arts, where my entire thesis is all about techniques, codification of techniques in writing dramatic music.
Wow, that sounds heavy. Can you briefly, and if possible, simply tell us what that's about?
Basically, all music theory is just, in my opinion, has always been somebody looking at what other people have done and codifying what it was they were doing. Nobody wrote a harmony book that Bach studied. Bach wrote the music, and then somebody went and said, oh, look at what he's doing, and came up with, variety. And it wasn't just Bach, but I'll use him as an example. Came up with the rules that are taught today: no parallel fifths, certain kinds of chords you double the third, certain kinds of chords there was a kind of a whole list of guidelines, many of which I think they teach wrong, but that's my own opinion. And so basically what I was doing is I was looking at not only music that I had written, but also other people had written, looking at what the practices were, such as the dramatic variations that John Williams did on the Indiana Jones theme at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's a technique that I talk about. And I talk about what the tools are of using that technique: tempo, register, harmonization, texture, a variety of things. And so I codified all of this, started codifying this in my doctoral thesis. I remember when I started the process, I was actually teaching the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, which is what I called it when we went independent, decided to launch a website, thanks to Tim. Tim recommended that. And we started getting requests from people from all...
Who's Tim?
Tim was my assistant, Tim Hewling. He was my right-hand man, both working for me as a composing assistant, keeping my equipment running, doing orchestrations and copying and all kinds of various jobs for me. And he also was my right-hand man in doing the film scoring program when it was in its infancy. And he was teaching Finale and Digital Performer, I believe. And what ended up happening was that he was much more internet computer savvy than I am. He said we should put up a website. And we launched a website about the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, with the primary goal being promoting the program that existed. And what ended up happening is that we started getting requests from people wanting to come and study with me who were not in Seattle. And so we launched the two-week summer intensive program. That ran successfully for 17 years. And the only reason it stopped was because last summer I couldn't do it, but it's happening again this summer. While I was in Scotland, and so we ran the first one, you attended, you went back to Scotland, and next thing I know is I'm invited to teach the course in Scotland, which the following summer I did 2 weeks in Seattle and then 2 weeks in Scotland. Somebody who came to the first Scottish one was from Denmark, but Copenhagen. He went back to Copenhagen. The next thing I know, I'm now invited to Copenhagen to teach the program.
It's amazing, isn't it? How it spread and spread. It
spread like crazy. One of the years that I was in Scotland, I think it was the year after I had done my first year at Columbia College Chicago, and I was trying to figure out how I can continue having a career and still teaching. I decided I was going to go back to Seattle. And so I was on the phone with the licensing board in Washington, and they said, well, if you want to do, you could do a standalone master's degree. And I went, oh, what's involved in that? And they said, well, the first thing you'll need a doctorate, because you have to have a degree higher than the one you're giving out. So I went and spoke to the folks at Napier, and they said, well...
This is Napier University, Edinburgh.
Right, Napier University, Edinburgh, where I was teaching the summer programs in Scotland. They said, well, we'll look into giving you an honorary doctorate. So I called back up the licensing board in Washington the next day, and they said, no, it has to be an earned doctorate. So I went back to Napier and met with Stephen Davis Moon, who at that point was working at Napier University. And he said, I'd love to take you on as a doctoral candidate, but I'm going to another school. He left and went to the University of Salford. And the following September, I started working on my doctoral thesis with the University of Salford.
How long did that take to complete, Hummie?
It's kind of a mush of a memory. It was either 3 or 4 years. I remember starting the thing. It was a doctor of musical arts. First thing that was interesting is that when Stephen got to the University of Salford, he wrote me an email saying, listen, the university is celebrating its 10th year of giving out DMA degrees. And so I guess a contest would be the best way to say it, of candidates that they're going to give a scholarship to. So I submitted all my paperwork and all my scores. And the next thing I know is I was very fortunate, and I was given a full scholarship to do my doctorate at the University of Salford.
Wonderful.
And I remember Stephen telling me, oh, it'll be about, 150 pages, 20,000 words and a bunch of scores and stuff. And I said, okay, great. Well, 4 years later, 250 pages and 55,000 words later, two hardbound volumes, I finally finished my doctorate. And I'm very proud of the fact that I did it.
Absolutely. And what this means is, in terms of your own school, what's the ramifications of having that?
Well, the funny thing about it is that once Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program joined Seattle Film Institute, it wasn't as crucial that I had the doctorate. I mean, I really should have had a degree higher than what I was giving out. When I was teaching at Columbia College, all I had was a bachelor's degree, 2 Emmy Awards, and lots of experience. But unfortunately, in the educational world, that doesn't hold a lot of water. You need to have an educational degree. So there were moments, and I think that everybody who's ever gotten a doctorate will tell you this, there were moments where I just wanted to bag the whole thing and forget about it because it was just like, oh my, this is like so much work. But I persevered. I mean, there was a moment where I had to take like 4 or 5 months off and just back away from it because I was just, in fact, it was after I did the defense, or the viva voce, as they call it, of my doctorate. I just felt the examiners wanted me to include some other elements in the doctorate, and I thought I was kind of finished with the thesis. And in fact, I had to go back and revisit some things, and I'm sure that they were correct in their requests.
Well, it's all over now.
It's all over now. It's finished. And if you go and search Hummie Mann thesis, you can actually go read my thesis, and it like I said, it turned out to be 250 pages, 2 volumes, 4 CDs. I mean, it's an immense amount of work.
Now, your program now offers people full-time education in becoming film composers. Is that correct?
Yes, we now have. When we opened our doors, we started as a certificate. That never happened. It really became a master's degree almost immediately, and we offer a 1-year, 10-month master's in music in film composition. We were the only 1-year master's degree in the United States for many years. Other schools are starting to catch on and realizing that it can be done in a year. Primarily, requirements for an MM degree can be 1 year, but an MFA, Master of Fine Arts, requires it to be 2 years. And most of the schools in the United States offer MFAs. And it's not like there's that many. I think there may be 5 schools that offer a master's degree in film composition. We've been really, really fortunate. Maybe it's the quality of the training. Maybe we just got lucky. But our students are doing very well. Last year, we had a student working on Empire, Once Upon a Time, and Castle. We've had students, one of our students orchestrated on the new Trolls movie.
So it's not just a case you're giving people an education. They are actually taking that education and being gainfully employed within the arena that they dreamt they would want to get into.
Yeah, it's never going to be 100%. And some of them take their degrees and do different things. I mean, one of our students moved here was from Utah, moved back to Utah. I forget where he's living now, but he's managed to get himself a number of commissions with the local symphony orchestra. And it's not a minor symphony either. It's like the Utah Symphony. It's certainly it's not the Boston Symphony, obviously, but it's the major city symphony. It's not like the community orchestra, and some people have gone on to do arranging for different people. And so the skill sets, our main focus is dramatic music. But they take courses in writing songs for movies. They take courses in scoring video games. A lot of them have gotten work in the video game industry. A lot of them have done work in direct-to-video, feature films. A couple of weeks ago, I spent 2 hours on the phone, 1 hour with 2 different students who were both negotiating their first feature film scores. That's amazing.
And that's the proof is in the pudding. It's not just some academic course. It's actually you're getting people who are shining in the industry, and that's the great testament, surely, to the program and to the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that part of one of the secrets is that we're really kind of aiming towards the high end, and to that end, our students get to do 9 live musician recording sessions, everything from like 3 musicians and electronics, like they might have on a TV show, all the way up to a 52-piece orchestra. They score student-made films that we get from all over the world. We've gotten school submissions from schools in the UK, from India, from China. We've attracted so much attention because one of the things that we do is we offer student filmmakers original scores at no cost. And it's not original scores with synthesizers, it's original scores done with live musicians. And some of those films have gone on to play festivals and win awards. It's actually, our students have formed relationships with these guys. And so they end up not only scoring their student films, they do their first professional jobs outside of it. The other thing that happened that was a very big surprise to us is that there's a website called MusicSchoolCentral.com that rates music programs. So if you're an oboe major and you want to study oboe, what are the top 10 schools? And we were listed in the top 10 schools that offer master's degrees in film composition or educational programs in film composition. And we were listed number 4 in the world, which was
absolutely incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, we were blown away. The students knew about it a year before we did. They all said, "Oh yeah, we heard about your Music School Central." I said, "Music School Central, what's that?" And I went in, and found out that the only other schools that beat us were NYU, USC, and Berklee College of Music, all of which are major institutions. We're this small 75-person school up in the top left corner of the United States.
Size isn't everything, as I've often been told. Now, I have heard it said, and you can, if you don't want to comment, then that's fine. But I have heard through the grapevine that you're writing a book. Is that correct?
I am writing a book. There is truth to that, and I want to make a public statement that Jed is the person I have to blame for this endeavor. Years ago, he suggested that I take all of this great knowledge and put it into a book. We started together, and it's been a very long process.
How many pages are you up to now?
It's about 350 pages.
Wow.
And basically, I think that one of the advantages of having held off was the idea that I use the chapters in the book when I'm teaching the master students. And so I've been able to really kind of test all of the approaches in terms of how I'm teaching things. And it's been a really good experience. In fact, I was hoping to take last summer. I didn't run the 2-week summer intensive because I was planning on finishing the book. And what ended up happening was that my wife and I decided to move. And so we had a house to sell and pack up and move into a new house. This summer, I'm doing the 2-week summer intensive. So if nothing else, next summer will be the summer that I will finish the book. Although, really, when I say finishing the book, I need to go through and make sure that I add elements to the chapters that do not require a live lecture. And right now, a lot of them are additional materials to support what was a live lecture.
Well, perhaps you could maybe do filmed lectures and give people codes that they can go and watch things online. But anyway, let's not get into there. I'm sure it'd be great if you finished that next year, Hummie. I mean, there's thousands of people all over the world who would love to get their hands on that book and just read the concepts that you can't read anywhere else. Just to finish this podcast interview with you, I want to ask you just a few questions. Do you got any stories that you can, without getting us both into trouble, say that just in crazy world of Hollywood?
Crazy world of Hollywood. Probably the one of the more crazy stories that I have to tell is I worked on another film with James Newton Howard where I was hired by the lead orchestrator, a very good friend of mine named Brad Decter. And Brad was doing all of the orchestration on a movie called Prince of Tides. And one night I'm driving home from dinner. I'd taken my family out to dinner, and Brad calls me and says, Hummie, what are you doing? And I said, I'm driving home from dinner. He said, how quickly can you get over to 20th Century Fox, one of the big studios? And I said, I could probably be there in about 20 minutes. Why? He said, well, there was an arrangement that was done of a song that Barbara Streisand is supposed to be singing. She's the director of the film. She was going to sing the song. She doesn't like the arrangement. I have to rewrite the arrangement. I need some help. So I took my family home, ran over to 20th Century Fox, and Brad Decter and I are sitting in a back room with 100-piece orchestra sitting waiting for us. And we're sharing a keyboard that we took from one of the keyboard players. He's writing string parts, passing me pages of score, and I'm writing the woodwinds and the brass parts and percussion parts. And then I'm handing the pages off to the copyist, page by page. 100-piece orchestra at thousands of dollars an hour are sitting there waiting, twiddling their thumbs while we're doing this. And we had to rewrite the arrangement that was written for this song. Barbara Streisand at one point comes in, puts her hands on my shoulders, leans over and says, how do you guys do this so fast? And we're like,
we're sweat pouring off you.
We're sweat pouring off us, exactly, because here we are. We're about to write an arrangement for, in my opinion, one of the greatest singers of all time. We write the arrangement. They play it down. Barbara loves it. She goes, without warming up or anything, goes into an ISO chamber and starts singing the song, and the hair is standing up on the back of my neck. It was such an amazing moment, having to work under incredible pressure and being able to pull something off that met Barbara's standards was great.
And that's why she's a superstar.
Yeah, well, she is in my book.
So do you have any other Hollywood stories you could share with us?
Well, I have to tell you one of the things that happened to me that I'm particularly proud of, and that is the fact that everybody in this industry there are people who are your idols, and one of my idols was Jerry Goldsmith, who was not only a fabulous talent, but I grew to know him a fair bit. I can't say we were ever friends, but certainly colleagues, which is not something that I would have ever said, because to me, he was kind of a god. There's a great story that happened, which is that after I scored Robin Hood Men in Tights, Jerry and I at that point shared the same agent. And one day I get a phone call from my agent, who at the time was Richard Kraft. And Richard says to me, Hummie, I meant to tell you the first time Jerry said this, but he mentioned it again today at lunch. And I said, well, what? He said, well, he was really impressed with your work on Robin Hood Men in Tights. And of course, I was like taken aback that Jerry Goldsmith had even noticed me. Richard said, well, you should call him. And I went, okay, I'll call him. And so he gives me Jerry's number, and I call Jerry, and I get his assistant on the phone, Lois. She says that Jerry, went into the house. Jerry went into the house, and he'll be back in a second. So, of course, I'm making small talk with Lois, talking about the weather and stuff like that. And it seemed to be an hour, although I'm sure it was more like 5 minutes because I was so nervous about the idea that I was actually going to have a conversation with Jerry Goldsmith. I'm about to hang up. I said, well, listen, Lois, I was just calling to tell Jerry that, I really appreciated his kind words about my score to Robin Hood Men in Tights. And Lois goes, his kind words? Jerry never says a nice thing about another composer. That's very unusual. And I'm going, oh my God, this is getting weirder. Jerry comes in. So I'm about to get off the phone, and she says, oh, here comes Jerry. Jerry comes in, grabs the phone, and literally spends, it must have been an hour with me on the phone, because I had just been signed to do this 10-picture deal for Showtime where I got to work with all these great directors. And Jerry had worked with all of these directors, or a lot of them. And so he was telling me, he said, okay, well, so-and-so likes this and so-and-so likes that, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was like talking to a peer, and I was like so blown away. That's how we started our relationship. A couple of months later, or maybe a year later, I get a phone call from Jerry that he was working on a film. He had just been hired to replace another score and was really tired and was about to go work on this other film, which will be nameless. What he wanted to do is he wanted to write the themes and wanted me to do the score based on his themes. And it would say music by Hummie Mann, themes and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, music by Hummie Mann. Oh. And I went, oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely. No question. He says, okay, well, listen, I'm doing the last recording session of this other film that I just finished working on. Why don't you come down to the session? Let's go have lunch and we'll talk about some details. So I go down to the session. I attend the session, this last session of this other film he's working on. We have lunch and we talk about the details. And that's when he explains to me the credits and how he's going to work and all this. And I'm going, great. Later that day, I get a phone call from Richard Kraft. And he says, well, Hummie, I've got some bad news. Okay, what's the bad news? The bad news is that the producers are not willing to give you credit on the movie. And I went, well, that's kind of a drag because I'm going to be doing the score. Jerry made it very clear what he wanted the credits to be. He said, yeah, well, the producers feel that they only want Jerry's name on the poster and they only want Jerry's name in the credits of the movie. And I said, okay, well, that's a drag, but I still get to work with Jerry. So, let's go with that. The next thing I know is I get a call from Jerry, and he says to me, Hummie, I'm walking off the film. If they're not going to give you credits, I'm telling them I'm walking off the film, which blew me away. You could think of that as like, wow, he's really supporting me, or he's being, you could cynically look at it another way, but I took it as like, man, this is amazing. Jerry's going to turn down a gig because of me. That's incredible. Anyway, ultimately, he walked off the film. They refused to give me the credit. I didn't get the opportunity.
So why would they do that? I mean, why would they refuse just to give you the credit?
Because producers want, they like having stars' names on the posters. If they gave me the credit, they would have had to give me credit on the poster. They would have said Jerry's name and my name, and they didn't want to do that. They kind of felt that me being involved in the project was probably, diluting the power of Jerry's name So that's the first time that happens. The next time it happens, he calls me up and he said, Hummie, okay, I've already cleared it with the studio. I'm working on a film. I haven't gotten the final reel, but I know the final reel is going to be really busy, a big, huge action sequence. So I'm going to need your help because we score in a week. So when the reel comes in, you're going to get not credit in the front of the movie, but you'll get additional music by credit at the end of the film. And I'm going, okay, no problem. That's fine. So we end up, I clear my schedule. Everything's set. The studio's agreed. Everybody's agreed. The final reel comes in, which is usually about 10 or 11 minutes long. And now instead of there being 11 minutes of music, there's only 3 minutes of music. So Jerry calls me up and says, Hummie, I only have 3 minutes to write. I can do that myself. So the second time it falls apart. The third time he called me to work on the main title for the Voyager TV series, which we've already talked about. And at that point, I had basically stopped orchestrating, but I couldn't turn Jerry down because, he'd been so kind to me on these other 2 opportunities. So I ended up orchestrating not only the main title for the series, but what are called bumpers, which are the little pieces they play in between commercials, saying Voyager will be right back. And then I also wrote the arrangement that he conducted live. And that happened later. After the session, Jerry and I went out to lunch. He thanked me for putting the basses in, but he said he really wanted the timpani solo. And at which point he asked me to become his orchestrator. And I would have orchestrated his last 5 or 6 movies. But at the time, nobody knew that Jerry was ill. And I don't even think he knew. I was really trying to break the mold of being an orchestrator anymore. And so I turned him down.
Do you regret that decision?
Regret would be a hard thing. I mean, he understood why I did it. I mean, he understood that Hollywood likes to pigeonhole people. And I already had worked so hard at establishing myself as a composer with Robin Hood Men in Tights and Dracula Dead and Loving It and Year of the Comet, that he understood that it would have been probably not the best thing for me. And he thanked me very much. He said, he needed a new orchestrator, and he would have loved working with me, and I would have loved working with him, but I couldn't take it on. And it's an unfortunate thing. I would have been great to work with him for one of my all-time favorite film scores he did after that, Basic Instinct, but it just wasn't to be.
And was that the last time you saw Jerry?
It was the last time I saw him, but we talked on the phone, not all the time, but like once a year. I'd call him up and we would check in with each other. And he was very personable and, always very supportive of my career. It's just an amazing story because there were moments in my career, as I think in everybody who's a creative person's career, where you just go, man, this is hard. There's got to be some easier way to make a living. We all go through that. And every time that I felt that way, and still to this day, every time I feel that way, I remember that Jerry Goldsmith believed in me. And, when somebody of that high a level and such a legend, who, by the way, just this week got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame just 2 days ago. When somebody like that tells you that you've got it, and not only that, he told other people. I mean, he was actually recommending me to other composers, to other directors. I mean, he recommended me to Joe Dante and Jonathan Kaplan, who I ended up working with numerous times, and saying extremely nice things about me.
And Hummie, what projects do you have on at this time?
I'm currently involved in 2 projects. I'm going to be scoring documentary feature about the history of the automats, which is a really interesting thing. You may not be familiar with this, but there was a time in downtown New York, as far as I know, there were 3 of them. They were run by a company called Horn and Hardart. There were these restaurants where you would walk in, and it was kind of before vending machines became popular, and you'd walk up to the wall, and there'd be these little boxes, and you put a quarter in the box, turn a knob, the door would open, and you would take the dish out that you had looked at through a window. And then the kitchen from behind the other side of the wall would put another dish of food in there. And these were called automats. They were very popular. In fact, what I learned from watching parts of the documentary is that big stars of the time rent the automats, close them down, and hold private parties, like people like Jack Benny. And he would hold a private party, and he'd give out quarters to all of his friends, and they could get whatever food they wanted from them. Interestingly enough is that the filmmaker interviewed a bunch of celebrities. One of the celebrities was Mel Brooks. And Mel has written a song for the end of the movie, which I'm arranging. So has teamed, talk about a small world, has teamed me and Mel back up again. And so that's one project I'm working on. The other project I'm working on, which I'm very excited about as well, has been a long-term project. I've been hired to write the songs and the score for an animated feature called Vincent the Artist, which is the story of a rat who runs away from home because he wants to become an artist, where his father wants him to become a teacher and do a regular job, which I can relate to. And I'm working with my songwriting partner Sue Ennis, and we are in the process of writing 12 songs for the movie. this is a very long-term project. We have to finish the songs. There'll be another rewrite of the script, and then they have to, they're going to cast it, and it's in process.
When do you think that'll hit the screens, Hummie?
That's probably at least 2 years away.
Wow. You're right, it is long term.
Yeah, and animated projects take forever because you have to do the writing, you have to record the voices, you have to do the animation, you have to tweak the animation, then it comes back to me, and then I have to score it. So it's a very long process. It's a very exciting project that's gotten producers have taken it to the film market, they've taken it to Cannes, and they get a lot of excitement about the project, but it's, it just takes forever to get these things going. It's what we call development hell. It just takes a while to get all the pieces, all the financing, all the actors, all the bits put together.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be well worth waiting for. So, Hummie, just thank you very much for all your time in talking to GMI. I've learned lots, and the stories have been great, and it's just fantastic to hear firsthand from someone who's worked at the highest level and continues to work at the highest echelon of the industry, how they got there and how they stayed there. Thanks so much for speaking to GMI.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed the Hummie Man interviews, then make sure that you subscribe and come back, because we've got plenty of fantastic visitors and episodes coming up on the GMI podcast. You haven't subscribed on any of the services that you found us on, please consider doing so. So that all that's left to say is thanks for listening, and I look forward to having your company on the next episode. Bye for now.